everyone. Welcome to our Geneva Urban Debate on local leadership on water resilience, co-organized by the Global Cities Hub and UN Habitat. Yesterday, you may have seen it in the news and social media. It was World Water Day, a global moment for raising awareness and sharing solutions on Sustainable Development Goal number 6 to ensure availability and sustainability management of water and sanitation for all. A few housekeeping matters before we start. You've heard it the event is being recorded. It will be made available on our website, globalcitieshub.org, afterwards. The event will be held in English with French interpretation, thanks to our friend Julian. And there's also translated captioning at the bottom of your Zoom screen so that you may follow the meeting in another preferred language. And don't hesitate, of course, to use the Q&A available on Zoom to raise questions, make comments, share your views. Please, we'd like to make it as interactive as possible. My name is Anne Tudrong. I'm the co-director of Global Cities Hub. For those who don't know us yet, the Global Cities Hub is an organization based in Geneva that pursues two objectives. The first one is to connect cities and regions to the United Nations and other international organizations to enhance the influence of cities and regions at the international level. To do so, we encourage international organizations, but also states, to work a bit more with cities and vice versa in the international arena. The second objective that we pursue is that we promote the urban on the agenda of the international community, because we all know it, our future is urban. We want the international community to better take into account urbanization in its work. And the Geneva Urban Debate that we co-organize with UN Habitat is part of this effort. When we look at any global challenge tackled by the international community, we want to make sure that an urban lens is applied and that we look at the specificities of the urban environment. As you all know, cities are on the front line of the global water crisis, be it in preventing it, preparing for it, and responding to either accessible water or lack thereof. And as urbanization accelerates worldwide, the number of people that are impacted by extreme water-related events will only increase. And we need to be aware of it, understand the phenomenon, and come up with solutions to better prevent, prepare, respond to floods and droughts in urban contexts that are very densely populated. So I'm very pleased today to co-host this meeting with UN Habitat, the UN entity mandated to work with many partners to build safe, resilient, and sustainable cities worldwide. This is a one-hour event with two very distinguished speakers from the city of Cape Town and Switzerland that will dwell both on the experience of the city of Cape Town in managing water and sanitation, and also touching upon the UN Water Conference that will take place at the end of the year in Abu Dhabi. First, we'll hear, however, from Graham Alabaster. You are the head of the UN Habitat office in Geneva. And you are a public health engineer by profession and a real expert in water and sanitation. UN Habitat works to improve, among its very broad mandate, it works to improve water resources management and access to safe water and sanitation for all. Because, of course, it is essential for eradicating poverty, building peaceful and prosperous societies, and ensuring that no one is left behind on the path towards sustainable development. So I've got a few questions for you to start with, Graham. Maybe the first one, because you have such a broad perspective about what's going on worldwide, I'd like to ask you, what are the biggest issues that cities face when trying to manage water resources sustainably, both in global south and global north? And two more questions, one about nature-based solutions. We hear more and more about those nature-based solutions for urban water resilience, such as restoring wetlands, restoring permeable surfaces and urban rivers in cities. What do you see on the ground? Do you see cities successfully scale these approaches? And the last question is about innovation. It's always back to data and forecasting. And what innovations are emerging to help cities anticipate drought and flood? Thank you. Floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Antu, and hello to everyone. Thank you for joining this event on behalf of UN Habitat. Yes, of course, we know that urbanization is going ahead. We know that by 2050, about 70% of the world's population will live in an urban agglomeration of some kind. But what we also don't realize, perhaps we don't hear this statistic, is that of all the urban space that will exist in 2050, 60% of it is yet to be built. So when it comes to water resources and water resilience management, we have two areas to consider. We have to look at improving the levels of service to those existing urban spaces, which, there's an equity issue there as well. And we also have to understand what we need to prepare for in the future, what sort of infrastructure we will need to provide for this 60% of urban space that haven't been built. So, as we've heard from Antu, as urbanization increases, we get increasing population density. This is due to a variety of reasons, partly maybe due to climate migration, also sadly in many parts of the world due to conflict. People migrate towards urban areas. And this is the biggest challenge. This natural increase in urban population must be enhanced or exacerbated issues related to these other geopolitical events. And usually the infrastructure that's present, of course, is not adequate because there's not a lot of planning that goes into future water resources. We extend and try and manage with what we have, but it's the biggest problem. Outdated infrastructure, there's been a lack of investment. And we've seen, because in many countries, this privatization and commercialization, that much of this investment to maintain systems has been lacking. So we find, even in some of the most developed countries, that water systems are not really efficient. There's very high levels of unaccounted for water. A lot is through leakage in pipes, but then also mismanagement and problems with billing and the collection of revenue. So these are the biggest challenges. When water's not scarce, when there's good availability of both surface and groundwater, people don't worry about scarcity. But if those resources become limited due to climate means or to literally a problem of management, that's when people start to look more closely. So one of the biggest challenges in water resources is managing the demand. And at the moment, in many countries, this isn't done particularly well because resources are available. As resources due to climate decrease, people will turn much more towards water demand management. The concept of water demand management isn't new, and there's many cities around the world that have had to deal with this. We're going to hear from Cape Town, which is a good example, but there are many other mega cities that have this problem. So on the one hand, it's the provision of water and the availability of water resources. And on the other hand, we have the issue of pollution of water resources. Of course, large amounts of water for urban development come from surface water, and this can be polluted if wastewater or sanitation or solid waste is not disposed of in an efficient way. So when water becomes polluted, it's more expensive to treat it and provide it better, so the unit costs go up. So there's this challenge, both with water resources, but also protecting scarce resources as we move forward. You mentioned for the second issue, the increasing adoption of nature-based solutions. And of course, we know these systems are very good for resilience. For example, using water bodies for storage, particularly for extreme climate events, using these storage basins and the like and wetlands to protect from the risk of flooding. When you have flooding, in most cases, it causes contamination of water resources. So there's an issue there. So the option of using nature-based solutions is, of course, very good. But the issue at the moment is that the planning of nature-based solutions goes way beyond just the normal, if you like, the normal departments who manage water and sanitation. It goes into departments of urban planning and health and education, and land use planning, which of course need a multi-sectoral approach at city level. And this is why many of these issues need to be tackled at the local level, and sometimes national legislation doesn't quite cater for that. There is also another issue, and this sort of goes into the area of innovation, but as we become increasingly interested in being a connected world, and we need data centers, for example. Data centers now are using large amounts of water in some places around the world, to such an extent that it's depleting water available for other uses. As this demand for access to the internet and data management data centers goes up, water resources will be consumed, and until technology catches up, this will be another area we have to consider. There are, moving on to your third question, Antu, on innovation, there are some new tools available to help us manage water resources more effectively. There's a lot more, for example, to measure pollution of substances which hitherto were impossible to track, things like narcotics in water, all these sorts of things. They can now be traced very effectively. Things like, I'm sure you've all heard of PFAS, for example, this contaminants. These can be monitored now. There's ways of monitoring that we didn't have before. And also, when we look at things like water demand management, one of the biggest issues is managing of networks and leakage in water systems. We're developing at the moment tools using quantum computing algorithms to help us to understand the leakage in these systems more effectively. And in fact, the Habitat has a project at the moment with Mexico City doing precisely this, and using quantum computing to model networks so that we can work out how we put meters and monitoring in Mexico City's water distribution network to give us a better handle, if you like, on how it's being managed. So it's not all doom and gloom. There's a lot of things to think about, but there's also a lot of new tools available that are exciting that we can bring to bear in this. But again, the issue is it's not a one-size-fits-all approach. Individual urban areas and cities, based on their basins, their river basins, and which basins they belong to, they need to be a local element of catchment management. The only other thing I will say is that, and there's some unexpected consequences of, on the one hand, flooding, and on the other hand, droughts. And it's also causing change many of the diseases that we expect. Of course, if people don't have access to water, there's a risk of waterborne diseases and water-wash diseases. But for example, some work we've been doing on the transmission of dengue fever in urban areas is also governed a lot by water, because when there's a water shortage, people store water in their households, and mosquitoes grow in those storage containers, which means you get other diseases. So there's a direct impact of water, managing water effectively, but there's also an indirect issue related to health and population. So anyway, I'll stop there, but it's an exciting area of work, and I look forward to hearing from the other speakers today. Thank you.
Thank you, Graham. And it's really a perfect, like global introduction for us to understand what are the main issues, in a very short amount of time, what are the main issues suffered by, addressed by cities when tackling water management. Thanks a lot for that. I really like it's not all doom and gloom, and there's a possibility to do a little bit better. And I think this is what we're going to do with Cape Town, look at the experience, the extremely interesting experience from the city of Cape Town in South Africa. I'm turning to you, Councillor Badruddin. You traded a medical career 10 years ago to become a politician. You've been elected in 2016 to become a councillor of the city of Cape Town. And you have been, in the past 3 years, if I'm not mistaken, a member of the mayoral committee, which aimed to promote more effective service delivery to the people of Cape Town. and your specific portfolio is on water. And in that capacity, your responsibilities include the management of water, catchment areas, and water storage, which you just referred to earlier, Graham. The treatment of wastewaters as well. You also mentioned pollution and its safe disposal back into the environment. So it's a pretty broad portfolio, which is absolutely essential for all residents of the city of Cape Town. I'm going to ask you a few questions that you are free to address in your intervention, Councillor. I'd like to touch, of course, on the 2018 drought that touched Cape Town, where you were extremely close to what we call day zero. And at that time, I believe it was a bit of an alarm bell worldwide. Yeah, hey guys, we now basically, it's becoming a reality. We really lack water in some parts of the world, and probably the future is not that bright in that area. So looking back at that day zero back in 2018, I'd like to hear from you. What do you think were the decisions, the communication strategies that made the biggest difference in avoiding that scenario at that time? I can see now that you're very active on social media to call on people to use less water. So, how do you communicate around this? Second question relates to your water sources. How do you diversify water sources? A lot of cities worldwide rely on rainfall and reservoirs. So is that the case also in Cape Town? How do you plan for the future, or even today, because I understand you're already under water stress now. You have adopted a water strategy a few years ago. I think you can take a step back now and tell us to what extent that strategy is efficient, effective or not. What are still the gaps, but also the opportunities? And finally, sorry, it's a lot of questions. Two more questions. The financing models, that really the crux of the matter. How do you fund all that infrastructure investment that is so dearly needed everywhere to, identify leakages, to repair them, to treat pollution? How do you raise funds for that? Is it a mixed model? Is it on public? Is it private? Tell us a little bit more about this. And finally, I think I would like to hear about the relationship between the local and the national level. What are the national level legislative or policy shifts that are critical to scale systemic solutions to sustainable urban water management at your local level? So that's more than enough to start with. You've got a bit of time for us to tell us everything about the experience of Cape Town. Thank you, Councillor.
Super, thank you so much. Good afternoon to everyone from the city of Cape Town. I'm going to quickly see if I'm able to present my screen, if someone can just let me know.
Yes, we can see it.
Cool.
Perfect.
I thought let me share with everyone that's joined us here this afternoon just some pictures in terms of what it is that we've worked our way through in the city and where we are on our way at the moment. And I maybe want to pick up the line from the previous speaker regarding it wasn't all doom and gloom. And I suppose that close to day zero, as we were a few weeks, if not days away from that dreaded day, I'm sure the residents in the city of Cape Town would have felt this feeling of doom and gloom. But what we've taken away as a municipality certainly is definitely much more than just that, actually quite positive, especially in terms of the ongoing need to invest in infrastructure to secure our water future. And so when people mention the city of Cape Town, I'm sure everyone thinks about our wonderful Table Mountain. This is a picture of our waterfront, amazing, stunning, visuals that come from the city of Cape Town. But at the same time, we also have growing informality across our city for various reasons, migration from other provinces to our city, where residents often come to try and access better education, better work opportunities, better health care access, and so on. And so the scale of service within our municipality stretches all the way from anything that is formalized houses in really wealthy communities to the other side of the spectrum, which really is this informality which you see on your screen, where these communities also require access to basic services like taps, like water, in spaces where often these structures you see on your screen are erected where bulk infrastructure may not exist. And so our municipality needing to overcome these types of challenges. And so you've made the point that the drought, let's say for all intents and purposes, was almost a decade ago. But at this moment, at this very moment, you will see that the city is potentially re-entering another drought cycle. You'll see that on the screen is our weekly water dashboard. Every week we communicate this through our city's website, through social media to our residents, so that they are very transparently able to access information regarding dam storage levels, which, as you can see at the moment, are at 49.6%, and then also the decline or water usage week on week, which on the 20th was at about 1.2%. But for the past few weeks since November, we've been seeing water dam levels decline by at least 2% week on week. And so this 1.2% is simply because we've had some colder weather with some light rains, not necessarily in our dam catchment areas. And so the city already has informed our residents, as you can see from the block at the bottom of the screen, that we are now currently in an early drought caution. We are already communicating to our residents that we are anticipating that if the predictions made by the South African Weather Services are accurate, that the rain which we expect potentially in April may not come, and that those rains may only come later May, which is already about a month later than our usual rainy period. So already we have some alarm bells going off. Already we're communicating with our residents. And just so a quick snapshot of our last drought period. You'll see that our dams at the very worst of it all was less than 20%. Our residents needed to reduce water usage by at least 54%, and that every resident was encouraged to only make use of 50 liters of water per person per day in our city. And so we always celebrate the fact that had it not been for our residents, we would not have been able to achieve the kind of water savings that we are so proud of through that drought period. And so we know that as we potentially enter another drought cycle, that together with our residents, on top of the infrastructure investments that we're currently making, it is possible for us to reduce water usage within our homes. And we further know that about 70% of the water we're using in the municipality at the moment happens in residences. So in my home and in my neighbors' homes and so on. You'll also see, I think, important points to make here, which support largely the blocks at the top of the screen. The fact that the issue of the drought received a name, Day Zero, which has, I think, become internationally recognized to refer to the situation where municipalities, cities, and towns may find themselves at the moment where they may potentially run out of water. And so Day Zero was the name that we gave this issue, something that in some senses really scared residents, but also in the same sense encouraged and motivated residents to form part of the exercise, the challenge to try and reduce water usage within our homes. Just again, some images, of residents standing at springs which are located across our municipality. As you can see, people with buckets in their hands, waiting to queue so that they are able to use the water in their homes. And then just this quick snapshot of one of our dams that supply our city. This is the Theewaterskloof Dam, and you can see the date stamps in terms of just the volume of water in the very top left image, all the way to January the 16th of January 2018, where that particular dam really was at its worst. And just an image from the ground, and some of these may have already been seen worldwide, but this really is the worst of the pictures that we have. And so residents often challenge the city in terms of, we've gone through the drought already. 10 years ago, we had to stand in queues to access spring water. You said to us, City of Cape Town, that we will never have to stand in queues again, and now we're at another drought. And so in our messaging to our residents, we're very clear that the city has an ambitious program to diversify our water sources, where currently you can see 98% of the water that we make use of in our municipality comes from surface water, roughly 6 major dams which supply us in the city of Cape Town, with about 2% coming from groundwater at the moment. By 2040, our new water program will diversify our water offering to the municipality so that 75% comes from surface water, so our dams, and then at least 25% will come from other sources, which includes groundwater, desalination, and water reuse. And so just quickly to zoom into what is this new water program? What is this ambitious plan that the City of Cape Town has for our residents? And actually, to correct me, it's not a plan. It's work that is already underway. And an important point for all municipal representatives who are here today, that residents don't necessarily want to read about the plan in a document that may be shared at regular intervals. Residents, especially in water scarce regions of the world, want to know that municipalities recognize the fact that that these specific areas are within water constrained areas, and that there is a tangible implementable plan that exists not only on paper, but is actually also reflected in budget processes and in final budgets that municipalities may put together. And so our water program, our new water program, is well underway to bring online these alternative water sources, as I've mentioned, with the first projects to come online by about 2031. And so one of the easiest things, I would say, in inverted commas, easiest, is alien invasive plant removal. And this, ladies and gentlemen, is a simple intervention that seeks to remove non-indigenous alien plants from our dam catchment areas, so that when we do have rain, all surface runoff, or as much of it as possible, makes its way into our dams from those catchment areas. And you will see here that the intention, the objective of this particular exercise is to add about 55 billion liters of water per year back into our water network by 2026. And so this project is well underway. We do it in conjunction with the Nature Conservancy, and it is a program that is currently budgeted for and ongoing since the last few years in our municipality. Groundwater, we're quite blessed in our city to have 3 major aquifers: the Table Mountain Group Aquifer, the Cape Flats Aquifer, and the Atlantis Aquifer, very large underground resources. And so intentionally put the word responsible groundwater abstraction because it, as many of you will agree, cannot simply be the abstraction of groundwater from these resources, but must also be the topping up of groundwater from sources as well, in order to ensure that that resource is sustainably managed. And so our objective here, you'll see, is that by 2036, we have about 105 million liters of water per day. And then just quickly to squeeze through my remaining slides, water reuse, we will have the biggest reuse scheme on the African continent by 2031, which aims to produce 100 million liters of water. And I'm so excited because this project kicks off within the next year or two. And then lastly, obviously, we're a city surrounded by the sea. And so desalination is also an important part of our offering and will produce about 70 million liters per day. And just some schematic designs to share with you. In terms of advice, act early. The previous drought that the city had gone through, it's important to realize that we could not build ourselves out of that drought. That is why we relied on residents to work so closely with us to reduce usage within their homes. But potentially going into another drought cycle now, we've had the benefit of almost 10 years to ensure that we are implementing these infrastructure programs which can prevent our residents from needing to stand in queues. Trust is also an important component. And what I want to link to trust is transparency. Be honest with the residents regarding challenges. Be honest with residents in terms of the infrastructure investments as well. Don't hide anything from them. They want to know that you are on top of the issues. And then obviously, as you've seen, the diversification of water reuse, water sources is an important component of what must be done. And then just to touch on one of the last questions that Antu asked, all of this work must be institutionalized, whether it is on a local level at the municipality where funding is raised through tariffs and rates and so on in order to fund those programs, or whether it is nationally. In our country, National Department of Water and Sanitation largely is responsible for dams, so bulk water provision, and then municipalities are responsible for reticulation from those services, generally speaking. And so important to maintain existing infrastructure, reduce leaks within the reticulation network so that your non-revenue water can be as low as possible, and invest in pipe replacement upgrades, as we are currently doing in our city. About R500 million we are spending on pipe replacements. And make sure also, as our National Treasury has done, to try and ensure that all funds raised from particular utilities are then ring fenced for that particular utility, and that there's no subsidization for other utilities outside of water and sanitation, so that all of that money can go back into not only the capital investment, but the operational expenditure as well. Thank you, Antu.
Thank you, Councillor. Fantastic. It was so clear. I really appreciate the fact that the municipality is so transparent. I was looking at your website, and I did found, all those information week by week, so that people know what's the level of water that remains in the dam. I also appreciate the advice that you provide to other cities worldwide, even though there might be very different contexts for each of the cities with regard to their water sources, water management. They need to act early. They need to track the transparency from that and institutionalize in terms of the issue, in terms of giving it a name. I also very much like what you said, giving it a name helps people understand what's at stake, and to also keep the link with the national authorities in terms of how you tackle this issue. Maybe one last thing, because you touched upon it, but just one last thing before I give the floor to our next speaker. The funding. You said it's mainly municipal funding. Do you also go about private partnership or not?
Thank you. Yes. So municipalities have various options in our country in terms of how to fund some of these projects. Importantly, it's key that municipalities start within their own homes. So making sure that there are very effective credit control and debt collection policies, that when people use water, water is paid for, so that that income which is generated can then be placed back within that ecosystem of water and sanitation to fund not only capital investments, as you have seen from what I've shared, but can also fund the operational expenditure as well. So everything from energy expenses, chemical expenses, to staff and ongoing maintenance of infrastructure. But at the same time, in addition to making sure that municipalities have strong and effective mechanisms to collect that income streams, within our own context here in the city, we make use of support from developmental banks locally, but also internationally as well, who assist with loans in various forms to help fund either the planning component of the work that we're undertaking or to undertake, but at the same time may also consider funding some of the implementation component as well. Everyone who is online obviously realizes that nothing that we do in water and sanitation comes very cheaply. None of this technology is cheap whatsoever. And so the municipality, as a third stream now, at least in the city of Cape Town, has really invested ourselves more heavily into pursuing public-private partnerships as an alternative mechanism to try and reduce the impact, the cost impact to our residents in terms of what their contributions may be in terms of water levies or rates and so on. And so the city has taken a very bold decision in December last year that for our two major new water program offerings, desalination and water reuse, the City Council has supported the recommendation to undergo public-private partnerships with those two components. And so we're still in the early stages, but within the next few months to about a year, that information will soon become public in terms of how third-party entities can become involved. I do want to say that in our city, there's always an allergic reaction, let me use that phrase, when the residents hear public-private partnership, because there's this idea that public infrastructure that belongs to a municipality may then become privatized, and certainly that is not the case. The municipality, our municipality at least, will never be in a position where these key public institutions will be privatized, and so therefore it's within our interest as a municipality to try and control where the risk may lie, where the cost may lie, but also who owns the infrastructure. We as a municipality would like to maintain that. So just to summarize quickly, funds raised from residents, obviously water levies, rates, loans from development banks and other institutions, and then also really considering public-private partnerships as a potential means to help fund some of these large capital projects. Thank you.
Crystal clear, Councillor, and I think maybe on another time we would like to speak to you about those funds by multilateral development banks. We've been working on this here as well at the Global Cities Hub, trying to encourage states to ensure that local and regional governments get access to international sources of funding through the multilateral development bank. So it's a very big area where we would like to see a lot of improvement. Thank you so much, Councillor. Let me now move to our next distinguished speaker. Yes, you're online with us. You are the Deputy Head of Water Section at the Swiss Agency for Development and Cooperation. Thanks a lot for being with us. At the upcoming UN Water Conference that will take place in Abu Dhabi in December, and that is co-hosted by Senegal and the United Arab Emirates, Switzerland will be co-chairing with Ghana one of the 6 interactive dialogues that will really constitute the spine of the UN Water Conference, and you will be co-chairing an interactive dialogue on water for people. So I think the very basic question I would like to ask you is, what is the purpose? What are the expected outcomes of the 2026 UN Water Conference? We know that only 2 such conferences have taken place to date. You were the one telling me the first one took place in 1977, so a while ago, probably with a different landscape in terms of water issue. But there was also a second one in 2023, and we all remember it. And so tell us a little bit more, how does this third UN water conference, position itself in that landscape? Given that there is no UN water convention as such, no global UN water convention, despite the fact that in 2010, the General Assembly of the United Nations recognized a new human right to water and sanitation. So how do you see the future of water governance within the UN system? That would be the second question about the purpose, expected outcomes of the water conference, future of water governance. And the third one that is really specific to local and regional governments. We've heard it at length that municipalities play a crucial role in managing water and sanitation, with the example of Cape Town, but many, many others that come to mind. But they often are either absent or underrepresented in those big global negotiations. So how can the UN Water Conference enhance coordination across all those different levels of governance? You have the floor. Thank you, Fabrice.
Thank you very much, Antu, and welcome again to everyone, and thanks for joining us online. You're absolutely right. Water, which many consider the most essential of all the SDGs, because it underpins almost every other goal, still lacks a dedicated intergovernmental governance mechanism comparable to the Rio Conventions, for example. And I think this gap is not accidental. It reflects, first of all, the historical fragmentation of the water sector. It's, of course, fragmented within governments. We all know that. Multiple ministries share responsibility at different levels as well of government. But it's also, of course, fragmented at the UN level. There is no single UN organization exclusively mandated to lead on water. And I think that has played, of course, a very determining role, although probably not the only one. We do have a coordinating mechanism, platform called UN Water, but we still have over 30 UN entities that deal with water in one way or another. And I think this dispersion makes it difficult to elevate water to the same political visibility as other global environmental agendas. And that's why, and you mentioned it, in 2023, the UN conference, which was then only the second one ever held, generated so much hope. Although it did not create a mechanism, also because it was decided that the outcome would not be a negotiated document, you see, we start from from scratch in a way. So I think it'll take time to develop that. But the 2026 conference builds directly on that momentum. And a new conference is planned as well. You might know this in 2028. It's one of the results also of the 2023 conference. And the 2028 conference will coincide with the end of the Water Action Decade. And I think together, these moments are meant to accelerate SDG 6 and to restore water to the center of global priorities. So the conference that is planned, I think now it's moved a bit, it's at the end of November in the United Arab Emirates, has a clear objective. It states that it wants to deliver actionable, measurable proposals that advance SDG 6 implementation, accountability, and impact. But I must say that as a representative of Switzerland, and you've mentioned it, my country co-chairs and prepares one of the 6 interactive dialogues, I sincerely hope that the conference will also go beyond such very needed initiatives. I truly believe that we need concrete, realistic proposals also for the future governance of water, looking towards especially the post-2030 world. We need to agree on, what happens after 2030, of course, for all the other SDGs, but in particular for water, given its importance. And I can tell you that one idea already under discussion is the creation of a non-binding framework inspired by the Sendai framework, where governments and stakeholders could engage voluntarily, but within a recognized structure. And I think such an approach could offer stability and coherence without creating necessarily new legal obligations that are probably not very popular at the moment, and could attract broad support. Of course, this will require political commitment and financial investment too, both which are challenging, as I've just said, in the current context. But I think that the essential nature of water, that we often call blue gold, and the crises we face that were mentioned initially for health, for climate resilience, for security, I think they demand nothing else. And we truly believe that we will achieve that in the years to come. Maybe not at the end of this year in UAE, although we will try. But I can tell you from all the discussions I have had in the preparation to the 26th conference, there is a growing sense of responsibility from governments and all other stakeholders to really move towards such an institutional framework and to give the importance to water that it really deserves. I hope this answers your first question. Of course, many things could happen in between, and I'm just a bit guessing, but I'm guessing upon my experience of now quite a few years within the multilateral world in discussing water issues. So I hope we'll get there. I think water, contrary to many other topics, has this federating aspect because we all realize how vital it is, and we can, and it's also very tangible. I mean, when we lack water, when we have our glaciers that melt, when we experience devastating floods, etc., we realize the importance of water, probably more than any other development aspects. And your second question, sorry, Antu, was, I believe, regarding the role for cities, right, in that global water governance and what the UN conference, the 2026 water conference, will give to cities. Look, I think involving more or having cities heard and contribute to the UN Water Conference starts with creating, I think, dedicated spaces for local governments within the interactive dialogues on the conference. The Water Conference will happen on 3 days. There'll be an opening and a closing session. But I would say the crux of the conference are really these 6 interactive dialogues. And of course, all the other side events that will take place. But officially, these 6 interactive dialogues really try to capture all the topics. And I think we really need to have local governments participate to these dialogues. And in fact, in Interactive Dialogue A, the one that Switzerland is co-chairing with Ghana, that is exactly our intention. We want municipalities to be at the table because we really believe that national commitments only make sense if they translate into clear, well-resourced implementation pathways at the local level. Cities, municipalities are the first to be, to deal with water issues, and it's very much the case in Switzerland, but it's very much the case in many other countries. And I think our colleague, Mr. Badruddin, really, showed that very well as far as Cape Town is concerned. And that's why in Dialogue A, we are proposing to strengthen the ability of local actors to deliver resilient and equitable wash services. And we want to show that by advancing decentralization where appropriate, by investing in local capacities, and by ensuring that resources are aligned with clearly assigned responsibilities. municipalities need both the mandate, and the means, predictable financing and sustained capacity building to ensure water security on the ground. While we are still at early stages in the preparation of this dialogue, but we are constituting informal working groups to explore the different dimensions of Dialogue A. And we will approach many stakeholders in this regard. And one of these groups will focus specifically on decentralized capacity, resources, and accountability. A topic, of course, directly connected to local government's role. And, after hearing Mr. Badruddin, I would very much welcome the participation of the City of Cape Town in this group. And if you agree, I will contact you, Mr. Badruddin, after this webinar to see how Cape Town can contribute to the preparation of the dialogue, but also, of course, participate during the conference to this dialogue. And I think this invitation would also be open to other local governments and cities. Of course, space will be limited, but we are certainly interested in having the perspective of cities and local governments. I think this webinar has shown how crucial their role are in water governance and in ensuring that everyone gets to access clean water and sanitation. Thank you.
Thank you, Fabrice. Very pleased, to hear this connection being created live online. So all the others, local and regional governments, of course, Cape Town first, but all the others, please don't hesitate to raise your interest in relation to the UN Water Conference. Of course, it's a big conference, where you have a lot of events ongoing, like the interactive dialogue side events, but it's really a good opportunity to feel what are the discussions around water management, sanitation at the international level, and of course, to be able to somehow influence the narrative with your local perspective. So I can only encourage you to, contact us, contact Fabrice. Also, you've got our contact details, but it would be fantastic to have dedicated space for local and regional governments at the UN Water Conference, but also local and regional governments interested to engage in that discussion. We have 9 more minutes to go, and I wanted to check. No, there's no question in the chat. However, please don't hesitate to ask any question, to share your views, also how the situation is in relation to your own local context. That could be also interesting to hear. Maybe I'll go then with a follow-up question to Councillor Badruddin. I wanted to ask you the question of informal settlements. Yes, I can see you. You touched upon that, informal settlements that we could see in one image. How basically do you ensure that equal dimension of water management, access to water? Of course, you don't have the same infrastructure in the formal part of the city than in the informal part. So how do you deal with that? Because I guess the measures are not the same. People you're talking to are not the same. How do you do
that? Yeah, Antu, it's not easy at all. Is the simple, honest truth. During COVID-19, there was, I would say, a mushrooming, if not explosion, of informality across our city as people could no longer afford to pay rent or for where they're living, or have moved from backyards because they could no longer afford that to any space, actually. So sadly, you will see a situation where people have erected structures on open fields, on sand dunes, under electrical cabling, in wetlands, simply because at that time there was nowhere for them to live. And it almost feels as if our legal system was paralyzed as well, because instead of supporting the city to control these public open spaces, it had almost become illegal, impossible, I would say, for cities to manage, control, protect those areas which were never designed for dense type of living, as you saw in the one picture I had shared right at the very beginning. And so some of these communities have no bulk infrastructure, no sewer, no water network whatsoever. And so the city has to provide water infrastructure and sewer infrastructure in various ways. One of the ways, obviously, is through water tankers, which would see set days for certain communities to collect as much water as they need. And where it is possible for us, we make connections to water main lines so that at least we can erect some form of standpipe with drainage so that there is accessibility to water, because our constitution doesn't guarantee water, it guarantees accessibility to water and sanitation services. And so that is what we aim to achieve in terms of our national guidelines when it comes to the ratio of person to number of taps and toilets. It's definitely not an easy task in terms of sanitation. Our ideal is to provide full flush toilets wherever possible in sort of community.
We've lost
where,
you. No.
Am I back?
Yeah, sorry, there was just one cut.
Communal type options where it's possible for us to do so. Again, not always an option. And so we consider portable flush toilets and chemical toilets as well, in addition to other options. We now have an amazing partnership with the Gates Foundation, actually, where we're testing non-sewage sanitation, which I genuinely believe is going to be able to unlock dignified sanitation opportunities for residents who are, in more instances than not, some of our most vulnerable residents in the city. And so we keep having to think outside of the box to try and meet our objective of delivering dignified water and sanitation services where it is possible for us to do so. With a caveat, to say that all of these services are provided free of charge. We spend an enormous amount of money on maintenance of especially chemical and portable flush toilets, and there is no income generation from those services. And so there's a very large subsidization component in order to make sure that we're able to keep those services running. But we are now tiptoeing into the space of looking at models that could potentially pilot pay-to-use options, also with third parties, to try and offset the dependency on local government to provide those services, but potentially for a resident to go into a contractual arrangement with a third party in order to access those services on a pay-to-use model. Because we must make these decisions now, and I'm sure that those listening from developing countries at least will know the challenges of providing water and sanitation to highly dense informal areas and the cost that it has on municipalities and the urgent need to try and find alternative payment models for those. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor. Fascinating to hear, how you must think out of the box to cater to all, different needs of different population. I think I'll finish with you, Graham. A difficult question, but one action that cities, should prioritize over the next 5 years, 5 to 10 years, to strengthen urban water resilience from your point of view as a water expert.
Well, I mean, there's always a temptation to provide services for the people who vote for you. Okay? So I think, yes, of course, you're always going to get politicians to do that. But I think there's a need to make a determined effort to serve the vulnerable first. And I think that's, for me, for a very good reason. Partly because if you look at the layout of most cities, big cities, which have significant informal sector, the source of the revenue, a lot of the revenue that's generated by the city, the workforce comes from the informal area. So you have a huge responsibility, as our other colleagues mentioned, to invest in services for these people. And you know, we've done quite a lot of work as UN Habitat looking at network systems for low-income communities, low-cost sewage, for example, and the communal model, the pay-per-use for combined water and sanitation facilities in communities in very, very dense slums, where you really can make these models work. We've had very good success with the pay-to-use model that brings a good level of access to those at a very low cost, very low per capita costs. So I think we need to focus on the poorest in providing these systems. We need to be innovative. We need to look at these new small models that have been developed. What people forget is quite often they always say that the cost of water is high. For many of these slum dwellers, they're already paying 10 or 20 times what you and I pay for water. So it's not about the ability to pay, it's about the access, and it's about providing and finding technical solutions which will work in those settings and providing supportive community-based governance models to deliver those services. So for me, this is a very important aspect, and it applies to both water supply and sanitation. There's been a lot of interest in off-site sanitation, in on-site sanitation, because people say that flush toilets are inefficient, they use too much water. But in actual fact, if you look at the costs, when the densities get up to a certain level, the cost of low-cost sewage and waterborne sanitation is actually cheaper per capita than on-site sanitation. And you've got lots of huge health risks if you have on-site sanitation. You have the physical risks of moving excreta around, which in a dense community is not such a good idea, and the cost is high. So I think there's a need to look at adaptive systems. For example, the low-cost sewage technology was developed in Brazil some 40 years ago. It's used in high and low-income areas in Brazilian cities. We need to see more of that in Africa. We need to see more of these models adapted. So, I say UN Habitat's always been working in this area, is very keen to support. But I think that in answer to your question, we should focus on the most vulnerable first in order to see the city prosper and grow.
Thank you so much for that, Graham. And it's not fallen on deaf ears, hopefully. All the people that hear us online will take that into account. Thank you so much. There was a question from Yves Ladar about how this issue can be included in the conference agenda. I would encourage Fabrice maybe to respond to that question if you have a look at the Q&A directly, so that we can close, because and the hour has already passed. Let me simply thank both Councillor Badroudian, but also Fabrice, but also, of course, Graham. It was really interesting to hear, about your experience in Cape Town. Thank you so much for sharing all your work. I hope that can inspire other cities worldwide to also invest into those crucial infrastructure, not to wait for too long, as you say, act early. I think that's the crux of the matter. Thank you so much, Fabrice, also for providing us with, the state of play about water governance, the fact that maybe in the future we'll have a water framework very similar to the Sendai framework, so that we can steer the work on water governance and hopefully include the perspective of local and regional governments, because we've heard it many times again, they are absolutely crucial stakeholders in relation to how we manage the future of water. Thanks a lot. We will, again, put the recording of the event on our website. Thank you so much again for participating to this event. And again, please, all local and regional governments that are here with us online, please take into consideration the UN Water Conference that will take place. And we hopefully can also help you, find that space for you and come with a narrative around it to influence the debate. Thank you so much, everyone. Bon appetit for those who will be out for lunch. Thank you.
Thank you.